works. Okay, first I'll start off with a bit of a disclaimer. This presentation uses personal examples. It's not the view of my employer. Some fields are blacked out for pictures and the ongoing video recording. I know you can find the information. I know of no doubt you can make my life or others miserable. Please don't. Doxing is the art of reporting finding out who someone is. I'm not going to go too much into that. Rather, I'm going to go into the information sources that are out there and how that affects us as security professionals. This talk covers a lot of little things. The slide and references are online, so you don't have to worry about taking pictures of every last thing. That said, I'm Samuel Greenfeld. I am ISSP certified. I'm a member of the South Florida ISSA, and my date of birth is on the CD-ROM from 1997. It contains over 700,000 records of a federal license database. It's also, incidentally, 1997 was the year they stopped issuing date of birth with these sort of records, but they persisted online for several years. Most federal and state public and professional licenses are public information, so if you've ever wondered in Florida why you see your hairdresser posts their little certificate next to their chair saying they're a licensed hairdresser but kind of hides it because their address is on there, or why everyone's suddenly worried about having to register their drones with the Federal Aviation Administration, this is why. The last four digits in my college email address or my last four digits of my social security number. This was a very common practice at the time. We used social security numbers for everything. The pizza place had a list of social security numbers of everyone whose account at the college had over $50 in cash, so you could order stuff. Professors used it for grades. Everything. College administrators are kind of hesitant to admit they used to do this, but it was pretty common around that time. It was not around until 2007 when I first received an alternate ID number and this practice stopped. This school kept doing it up to, I guess, winter of 2011 with the last three digits of this social security number. This school also is Division I sports championship teams. So it's not like it's a minor school just in the middle of nowhere. Here is a university's job application system. It wants the last five digits of your social security number and the month and day of birth to create an identifier. I took this picture earlier this month. So that is still live, and this is actually a real university with somewhere in the state of Florida. And if you add up all the schools which had practices like this, you have an identity theft issue of the scale matching anything in the news today. The reason for this is, unless you're extremely young, social security numbers are predictable. Prior to 2011, social security numbers were issued in a predictable sequence. First three digits is just the location where it was identified. The middle digits are issued in a known sequence, and the Social Security Administration was nice enough to tell you when what numbers were valid in there because they needed some way for other people to do it. Last digit set is just sequential, and this becomes really important because the IRS started requiring Social Security numbers for dependents in 1987 to make sure you had a legitimate tax deduction. Around the same time, there was an enumeration and birth initiative causing 96% of infants to be given their Social Security number is issued electronically at the time they were done at the they were born. A Carnegie Mellon study in 2009 looked at the deaf master file for some of these students, the children born after this period, where they found they were able to determine the last four digits of the Social Security number within 1,000 attempts, and they could figure out the first five digits for 60% of the population within 2 attempts. So if the last digits are known, that's where all the potential pseudo-randomness is. So I know where you've been, it's all you can do. I should also note that your Florida's driver's license number is not much better. I just say this because you can do the obvious internet Google search and find out all the information on how to create your own. Not that I recommend doing that. And so, I just say this also because some sites like saying this would give us your last 4 digits of social security number as an identifier. They ask for the last 4 digits of your driver's license. And in Florida, that really doesn't give you very much information. Surprised? A news station figured out this obvious internet search a few years back. They even told someone, as far as I know, the practice hasn't changed. Someone also created a proof of concept last year where they showed off that they figured out a credit card vendor's number format. The earliest record I could find of someone figuring out bits and pieces of that credit card's number format dates back to 1989. And I have 2 credit cards from that vendor right now in my wallet where over half the digits are the same. Well, a lot of this is really just curiosity. It's not necessarily people being evil trying to do things like this. It may be people trying to figure it out. But it's not necessarily all this stuff is just public information, just generally talked in forums you wouldn't think of as Carter's forums or anything like that. It's just generally known information at the time. Now, as security professionals, we love to talk about the latest data breach technique, but we forget to consider what was acceptable in the past. All the previous items may have been great, given program requirements and the known security risks at the time, but data breaches like the one that happened here at UCF are scary, and I have no doubt someone's squirreling that information away for evil, malicious purposes. But I would argue, in the United States at least, public information and the information we voluntarily give away is just as dangerous. The reason this whole talk kind of came about was I was ordering something, actually the SSD drive I put in this laptop, and the computer store I was dealing with decided to pop up this form here after I'd entered in and the order was apparently processed. It's not just sales and backing that ask security questions like what's your birth date or whatever, claiming it's public information. If you ever signed up for like UPS's or FedEx's delivery notification services, they need some way of verifying who you are, and that's what they use. But in this case, they should never have been required this. I used a credit card with my exact address on it, and I was sending back to the address on the credit card. Therefore, they should have. There's a much more advanced version of you entering your zip code on the pump, where if you process things online, they can verify all the little parts of the address and verify that it was correct. They also tried using verified by Visa, but that wasn't supported by my bank. So I was pondering a bit. The first question they're asking is birthdays. Birth certificates and driver's license records tend to be pretty protected nowadays. They're kind of the exceptions. But voter registration's a possibility. Commercial records, obviously this is a third party giving them this information to try and identify me. Data aggregators, social media, maybe looking to see if someone said happy birthday to me, I don't know. But my bet, more than anything, was voter information. And in Florida, if you look, your name, address, date of birth, party of affiliation, when you voted is all public information. You can just submit a request to your local county, say, please give me these records. And even more interesting is they state the obvious, don't just pull it up here for purposes of the recording, that public information can find its way onto the internet by individuals or entities that obtain public records from the state. Once information is in the public domain, you'll need to contact the owner or administrator of third-party sites in order to get the information removed. Couldn't really say it much better, but there's lots of third-party sites grabbing this information, and they may not let you remove or change it. Worth noting that not all states let you use voter data for any purpose, although there are a number of interesting database compromises so far in this election cycle, or just voter databases were just found mysteriously open on the internet. If you don't want to use voter records, there's probably too many pay sites to list. If you just do a Google search for like someone's name, you'll find all sorts of companies trying to get information from you in terms of they'll give you someone's name, address, social media accounts, And really, if I wanted to do date of birth, the problem is there's so many of these sites that they're competing with each other that they each give different hits. So one may give you roughly how old I am. One may give you the month. One may give you the year. I've seen one that gave you a zodiac sign. And so eventually, maybe, especially if you could figure out it was the current month, maybe you just wait a few days, and maybe my evil malicious twin would win with me, who happened to live with me, would get my number. After this, the site asks a few more questions. I'll focus on the first and last ones first. It's asking for the approximate information of where I live, how big is it, is my little apartment I own, and what is the property tax amount on it. Gee, I wonder, is there a website with that information? I mean, and here is the amount of tax, and here's roughly how big it is. And the middle section was just a series of phone numbers. Did anyone just try just Googling that and seeing if any matches came up? It works rather well. And with that, I basically found another way, if I was not me, to answer all their checks. What's the problem here? Because companies want to know who they're dealing with, either for strict purposes of like authenticating someone or advertising, where you might just want to know generally, this might be someone. Users want to just be able to do things easily and have all the neat features like estimated time to your destination and things like that. Not to pick on the store, but if you had to do something like this, how would you do that to remotely identify someone you've never met? But what's the real problem? Big data is the in thing. Everyone wants to gather as much data as they can just in case they can use it. They want to make using their systems as sticky and easy as possible. But when everyone has lots of data, how do you identify someone? How do you differentiate your servers? All this old information, like my old CD is from 1997, is not going away. It's still readable, and I'm sure there's lots of other copies of it about. And lots of data is already compromised. Anyone and everyone wants to know what you're doing. Stores, data firms, nation states, and internet provider. Verizon in the past week, I believe, they just announced that it was minor fine of $1.4 million out of their hundreds of billions in revenue for adding a header to everyone using Verizon for their cell phones if you did not opt out, where it would go out on the internet, and if you send an HTTP request from your phone, they would add this header that uniquely identified your phone that someone else could just tag, and when they rotated it every few days, they could still tell it was your phone. AT&T has their new Gigapower service. They charge roughly $30 more a month. Some sources claim more for AT&T not to track your web browsing, search engine, and other behaviors, resulting in offers presented to you on the web, email, and postal mail. Who here thinks that would have ever thought that what you do on the internet at home is worth $30 a month to someone? How many internet providers out there may just be taking that $30 a month and pocketing it and not even telling you? And you can't always choose your internet provider. It's also interesting is last year Florida removed their universal service requirement. So already there's been a few cases where a development in construction had a contract with another provider, and then the phone company refused to wire the property or the remainder of the development still under construction. Private search engines, there's a lot of them, and just left some fields out here because they're incorrect. I did speak at Ohio Linux Finance, and I volunteered there, but they've never paid me. But that said, I've never lived in North Brunswick or worked for Laptop Magazine. If something's collected by the public, it's collected from the private, except you'd have to hunt down every private firm who's collected it to fix the records. And with all of this, as shown by the CD, the beginning is still here. Here are some emails I wrote probably roughly 15 years ago with my college email address. They're still online, somewhat embarrassingly. Now at the time I was in college, I was aware, and this is my college email address with my last 4 digits of my social security number in it too, I should add. All these emails, at the time I was aware of websites that subscribed to mailing lists and archived all the messages on public lists. But I would have never have thought 15 years ago that these would be online 15 years later. If you're a college student, this is a fair warning. But This is stuff, at the time these emails were written, the graphical World Wide Web was not even 10 years old. I mean, services like AOL, Prodigy, and CompuServe still were probably a bit in their heyday. Your average home internet connection was probably still less than a megabit or just dial-up. But all this old information is still there. And it's not just silly little things like us writing emails that are migrating on the internet. Here is a UCF graduate I know. One day he forgot his insurance card in 2002. And as you can see, he just came through and he paid the $5 fee, got it, and did all his stuff. And he just basically said, yeah, you have insurance, and let him on his way. But, oh, by the way, did I mention he went to traffic school for a violation in 1999? The internet brings a lot of stuff that was not previously online, and I would be very surprised if Orange County had a website like this back then. It's also worth noting that in these records, a lot of the information that you used to have to pay for to get for a full court records to see online, they've now made, as of last year, available for free. So you can go drill down pretty detailed, provided it's not something that is unlike juvenile or probate or something where the records are sealed. I should note I did get permission from him to use this example in this talk, though he did find this kind of embarrassing that I pointed out that he went to traffic school and he forgot about it. Here's an example from Broward County of someone getting a speeding ticket. The speeding information is actually further down on the page, but I have someone's, ignoring their attorney for the moment, I have someone's name, gender, race, height, and date of birth. Also just more records than you got from Orlando's and the earlier citations, but I also have all their vehicles information. So even though the DMV may not necessarily tell you who owns what, I can get those records from here. And if you get arrested, oh, hell breaks loose. Look at all this lovely information I got on someone who got hit on a misdemeanor charge. And if you're ever arrested, your mugshot photo is taken, and those are up within a few hours on the internet now. The mugshot records are also considered public information, and good luck ever getting those down from all the websites that pull them up, even if you're found innocent, that is. The driver's license numbers are, even though I showed you a formula you can kind of use to calculate them for the most part, they're considered private, but attached to this is a PDF document with the guy's driver's license number. Voting people won't give you signatures to copy, though you'll let you look at signatures. Here these are PDF files of the guy signing he's guilty. Admittedly, Broward County has an easy way to flag info should be directed, but the laws are contradicting themselves. I already know a property manager who knows about this. Broward County has this lovely website with all this information on it. She's already used it to take adverse action against people. Do you know or believe that a non-lawyer can accurately interpret this information? I found a case of potential pretrial intervention. The court record shows the guy, or whomever the suspect was, basically explicitly said he's going into pretrial intervention. He wrote a 5-page handwritten essay explaining why he did his bad. He took a drug test, and theoretically the charge was discharged. But the court record was still online. I don't know if it's no. Technically, that may be out of his criminal record, presuming that was an actual expungement. But how would you feel if you stumbled upon the record saying this guy went through this thing, even if he just handed you the paperwork saying, this doesn't count. You can't count this against me legally because this was erased off my record. And if you think no one is paying for bulk access or scraping this record website, you're kidding yourself. There's lots of firms, not just LexisNexis, and big name firms like those looking at court records. There's a lot of places you can kind of get information like this. And guess at this point, any questions in the first section? Okay. And then saying, I'm done talking about public information in various ways it can be found. So focus on how to affect us as security professionals and system designers. Fortunately, at least in my personal view, protecting against public information as well as people compromising information, stuff like that, follows much the same approach. I'm not going to go too much into authorization because access rights tend to be pretty system specific. Historically, we used to use security questions and stuff like that. Problem with security questions is Many answers are easily found in public record of social media. Also, Google did a study and they found 40% of users forgot their answers to the security questions. On top of that, while you think people may just throw random garbage in it, apparently Google found random stuff that people put in there that weren't the real answers, often were the same predictable non-real answers. If you've also with security questions, if you might not know, they're often used if you ever call the person the vendor or bank you're dealing with for answers. So if you put random whatever from your LastPass or KeyPass or whatever your password safe is to your security questions, be prepared to read that on the phone. Security pictures were an early form of two-factor authentication, which really isn't. Fortunately, this is going away. But the current trend, I would say, generally is, at least what's kind of ironically, is with all the data breaches in the news, what I was noticed over the past year or so is everyone is asking for more information. Here's Microsoft after their privacy policy update asking for more information. Not quite sure why they didn't have this information before. Granted, I've had a Microsoft account for a year. It's also an interesting usability example because they ask twice for the same information. But really what I've really started I think really happened is everyone realized last year with all the data breaches in the news that they really couldn't trust who they were dealing with just purely the way they've been doing it. So what's been going on is with more and more websites, they're doing some form of two-factor authentication. Two-factor is when you have something you know along with proof of something you have. The problem with the two-factor authentication is everyone seems to have their own solution. Some groups will do phone calls and SMS messages. Others use a system called open authentication. Google Authenticator actually is a pretty good example of open authentication. Basically, it lets you, the sites you deal with all generate secrets, and then it just updates the thing either every time the display appears or at set time intervals. And you can do here, as it's shown, you don't necessarily, everyone who deal with open authentication generates you a unique token. So here someone has a personal one and one for their employer. But it would be simple if everyone just used the same authenticator. We can't possibly have that, right? Microsoft has their own. Well, interestingly, they will issue you an oath token if you tell them other. But if you tell them you have an Android or an iPhone or something, they'll want you to download their app. Steam has an authenticator built into their store application, and Yahoo and Google are looking to skip the first factor of authentication and just identify you by your phone. But as noticed, many firms lately seem to be looking for your phone number, which is often true even if you have two-factor enabled. Often they want it as a password reset or something. Here's LinkedIn asking. Here's Steam, which is a game store asking. Here's American Express asking. Here's an interesting example of a financial website I dealt with where they asked for the mobile number. If you hit, there's a spot. It says it's optional in the fine text. There's a skip button, but if you hit the skip button, it says you didn't provide the number, and please, next time you log in, please give it. It's worth noting this financial site did fix that bug, but not every financial site will let you get away with not providing information like this. This also is an interesting example where this was one of the first websites I could not get through this dialog if I was blocking third-party trackers in my web browser. So even banking sites are playing with third-party trackers now. And it's not just phone numbers that's going on as a bit of an aside. When a company wants you to provide something, whether it's information, upload a photo, switch to paperless systems, they can get quite persistent nowadays. So users are being encouraged by pretty much every website they're going to now to provide information, even if it isn't really necessary to directly provide the service. Historically, we've told users don't provide your information to things unless necessary. Where have we seen this before, right? I mean, users will do anything really to get at the things what they're supposed to do. I mean, SSL warning studies typically show a 50% plus click-through rate, close to 100% if you tell them to do a task and they counter it on the way. Now users are being taught that every website and application they deal with asks their name, date of birth, zip code, things like that. This is more than enough to uniquely identify an individual. If users are willing to give almost every website their phone number nowadays, what about their social security number? If an industry newsletter sends a survey asking about your company's plans nowadays, will your employees provide that information? As Jim Wildman, who's a local Red Hat representative in this area, likes to say, it used to be we told our neighbors the intimate details of our lives and information didn't travel very far outside of the community. But now we tell complete strangers and those far away more about ourselves than our neighbors. We train people for this. Oh, look, this spam, there must be something wrong. Obviously, you can tell it's spam or phishing or something. You can't possibly respond to this. But in practice, the user evil is not always that obvious. I mean, there was a study that was done that's saying a lot of bank emails include the last 4 digits of your account number, right? Studies have shown people respond to the first 4 digits just as effectively, and the fourth digits just to identify what bank is on the card. Here we have an email I received last month from a properly mail relay, reputable mail system, completely digitally signed message authentication headers, Dickham if you're familiar with it, and it got through with a Trojan attached, made it through all the antivirus defenses. Would you be able to spot something like this if you were an accountant? Would your users necessarily, if you're a security professional? This problem is made much harder by the rate companies drown us in their advertising emails and stuff like that. I get if you sign up for like a reward service at a store, they like emails you several times per week. If you hoping you'll buy something from them. If you ever been to an event like this one, you'll find all sorts of vendors at that event potentially email you. Then you get emails from people you don't even recall seeing, and then maybe even companies you don't recall seeing if someone resells the list. So it's an odds game, really, because you're just drowning in this stuff, and at one point or another you're going to make a mistake. Still, fallbacks to historical approaches exist. What happens if the user doesn't have their second factor? You're going to have to find some way to identify them. You need FedEx and UPS, if you sign up for the service, will email you a postcard or letter. I recommend doing something like that to make it obvious that, and not use the path you use to reset the password, to tell the guy, I reset your password. If you change email addresses, send in one last message, vague one, to the old email address telling them their email has changed so they know and can contact you if there's a problem. And with any authentication system, you have to determine your acceptable level of risk. So, questions on that? Or okay. I guess the final section I'm going to kind of talk on is analytics. Have you ever searched on something on the internet and have it follow you around for a few days, perhaps even after you've purchased it? That's what a good example of analytics. Here I have 2 coffee makers, an older model and a newer one, both sitting in my kitchen. The older one is subject to a semi-documented buffer overflow, where if you hit both size buttons at once, it will just dump all the hot water it has until it runs out of water. But that's really meant to prime it, and you'd probably never get away with that for security reasons nowadays. But the new one, the new Keurig 2.0, is interesting, and not just because of all the DRM stuff people love talking about. Because if you look on the bottom of it, there's this interesting data port on the bottom of them. People have been, surprisingly haven't seen very much playing around with the data port. Keurig just says it's for expansion. But if you look on YouTube, there's a way you can get these into a diagnostic mode when they'll just start spitting out how you've used the device and all sorts of interesting statistics. This likely primarily, now this is a pretty harmless example. I imagine there's not a radio inside of your coffee maker calling home and sending data on how many cups of coffee you brewed that day. But if you ever return the unit to Keurig and say, I had a problem, this probably comes into play unless them figure out what was going on with the unit and how it worked. This is a rather benign example of analytics. Analytics is the discovery and communication of meaningful patterns in data. Site information can be used for site information and performance, also for user information and demographics. The problem is it's very hard to separate these two apart. I mean, it's great to know how everyone's traveling down the highway so you can figure out a speed estimate, but at the same time, you know the speed, what everyone on the highway is doing, you can figure out who they are. It can be used for secondary identification along with advertising. In general, you're not told about it. I guess I skipped some election examples, so I'll just cover them now. There was one presidential candidate, I believe it was Kite so far this cycle, though it's in my notes if you look at the slides online. He was looking at high school yearbooks to figure out potential influencers to use for purposes of his campaigns. And Ted Cruz has an application that he's giving out where I believe you get 250, I believe, action points, as they call them, for uploading your contacts out of your cell phone into their database. That's more points than they give for a variety of things. I do give credit to Cruz for actually asking first, because not all applications do that. But as a third election example is actually on this slide. It's been previously discovered if you show how someone votes compared to one of their a random neighbor of theirs, it'll increase voter turnout by 8%. But if you show how often someone voted compared to a name they might recognize, you can increase turnout roughly 15%. Some of the SSL warning dialogue studies with that I previously mentioned also were done with analytics. So Google, particularly Firefox and Chrome, they look at if you opt into their data collection, we'll look through the click-through rates of if you click through an SSL warning dialogue. Google Chrome was even looking at how fast you clicked at the SSL warning dialogue. And to their credit, they've been kind of standardized on it if you look at the studies I believe I linked to. Because Chrome caught from their studies that people are clicking through theirs a lot more than Firefox is, and then corrected for that. The next at this point, I'd normally be speaking about web analytics. I guess I'm going a bit faster. Well, question is voting the poll access public information? The fact you were at an election is public information. What your exact voting choice is, hopefully, is secret. But anyone can obtain the records to say, yes, I've even received postcards in the mail where someone said, congratulations, you voted in the past X elections. And I believe Ted Cruz did some sort of votability score, though I don't know the exact whatever, if they were just doing it as a threatening mailing or please come to the polls or don't come. I don't quite know what was going on there. Anyways, at this point I'd normally talk a bit about web analytics, but Cooper Kenton, the next speaker, is going to do an entire session on web analytics. So we talked in advance, and I'm going to focus on real-world examples, and he'll handle the non-real-world stuff. Internet style stuff. But I'm just going to steal one little thing from the systems the Electronic Frontier Foundation has, and looked at the Panoptic Click system. This is really an odds game. So you have a lot of little details, none of which this is a bit of an eye chart, but it's like this field over here is one. The field over here is does 1 in X browsers have this value, right? And none of those fields say 1 in 1. So it's not, none of these are unique on their own. But my browser is unique among the over 136,000 that websites tested. But not necessarily all of this is needed. My time zone changed because I'm in California. If the rest of the information still matches, it's still likely me. If my web user agent on my web browser changes because I upgraded it and it's a new version, it's still probably me, right? And where this really comes into questions is that your cell phone really has become the supercomputer, not just because your phone number, by being given to everyone, is effectively your new social security number, or really much the equivalent to. You don't change your mobile number very much, do you? If you move locations, you tend to keep it even if it's across states. Now we provide it to everyone who asks, not even applications on your phone might even ask, I've noticed, just as a password reset. You can identify your cell phone even if it's by tower check-ins. You know how Google can kind of automatically with their Now service figure out home and work? Well, an MIT and a university in Belgium looked at anonymized data for 15 months on 1.5 million users in Europe. They were able to identify 95% of them if they knew 4 data points. And they were able to identify approximately half of them with only 2 data points. This can be useful. With all that said, banks and credit card companies are looking into having their application on your phone so they know not to allow credit card transaction in another state while you're still in another location. So there is some benefits to it, but that means that your credit card and bank companies now know where you are and have a record of that in addition to every other record that could potentially be subpoenaed or combined everyone else could use. And if several firms have the same piece of information they can use it to combine their records. Bars like ID scanners. I mean, anyone ever have their driver's license swiped, right? There's a nice magnetic stripe USB scanner. All the data and then some on the front of your driver's license is in that signature, is on the rear. So if some of it may just be, okay, I want to swipe your license in my register to get the to get it. But if you test drive your car, okay, now they know your address, so they can start sending you flyers. Bars can know the same sort of information. Okay, now I can send you information too. And I've even, at least one grocery store I know of will ask to swipe your driver's license in order to get their rewards card. Granted, again, this is also great. It's a good as a computer measure for if you don't want someone to be one of your cashiers to be arrested and force them to swipe the driver's license to verify that the person is of age so they don't get in trouble. But beyond that, it's a bit of a problem. Vizio is now, with their new smart TVs, monitoring what you watch and using it so you can see targeted ads across all your devices. In order to get out of this, you have to opt out of their smart interactivity. Your driver's license records and your historically your video rental records are private. Vizio believes that this is not subject to those laws. In terms of, yes, you may be watching a video you rented, but the way they're accessing the data doesn't tell them it's a rental. Samsung notes that their new smart TVs support voice commands which may record sensitive information. I believe we have them all over our office. Unfortunately, I don't think any of our Samsung TVs are on the internet. I hope any, at least. And part of this is due to cross-device tracking, which the Trade Commission had a hearing on last November. An advocacy group, the Center for Democracy and Technology, noted that companies are doing this at a rate about 90% accuracy. One company they cite, the CDT cites, Silverpurse uses ultrasonic sound to track users' smartphones, tablets, desktop computers, and TVs. This is, as of April 2015, Silverpurse's software was known to be in 67 apps, and the company monitored 18 million smartphones per their own press release. And once you have all this data, you can enhance it. I have some data. Do you have some more data too? And a lot of your credit reporting agencies, as well as other companies like ChoicePoint, will happily, given a piece of data, tell you more information about someone. Here's an example of a service Experian offers where you have an IP address, and you give Experian just an IP address. They'll try to guess the demographics, age, occupation, personal interests, how likely you are to purchase things, creditworthiness, how much money you have, and more. Whatever really, just given an IP address. I mean, a lot of this is relatively straightforward. But if you collect enough data, you can find a lot of patterns and stuff. I mean, if you think about it, you swipe the credit card, someone's credit card, and you go to the store, ask, what's your zip code? It's not just necessarily to get, okay, you came from this zip code, the store's in this zip code, this is how far you traveled. Given the name off your credit card and the zip code, I can reverse address look up your actual address and then start sending you stuff. William Sonoma apparently does this, or did this, and it came up in a court case, and that's how I found out about it. And Vigilant is, I know, seems to be a villain at the moment. It's a company that captures private company that captures license plates. According to this, The Atlantic, this article from The Atlantic, they've taken roughly 2.2 billion license plate photos. And every month it's permanently stores another 80 million. Now we know with public license plate records how long they keep them, what's in them. Some people have even subpoenaed the records and said, look, I can show you, Mr. Representative, here's where you've been. And I was able to de-anonymize you. But this is also about the public-private blur, because there's also, Texas just, a lot of, Vigilant is giving them these machines to just work with and such. We know a fair amount about public databases, but when a public government buys it from a private database and the private people start working with the public people, the lines get blurred a lot. Fitbit is, if you have a device on you, is data exists and it's not legally protected, it can be in court. This is an interesting case also in that there's proprietary algorithms being used to prove the defender's case. Employers are worth noting are usually legally prohibited from accessing your records, but nothing stops them from asking a third party to look at the data. Implementing a fitness program can save a company potentially hundreds of thousands of dollars. It's not small discounts insurers give just for implementing one of these. But firms also mine data records on behalf of employers to figure out what percentage of the populations might become pregnant or sick. And if you know what portion of your population is becoming pregnant, do you think that potentially could impact hiring decisions? Granted, they won't necessarily tell you which employees they think are pregnant or becoming pregnant, but may be pregnant soon. They will just tell you percentages provided you have enough. But what rules apply to all this data? Here's an interesting service. Then I admit this first paragraph was recently removed. Here's a service called Higgy. You may have seen them in public stores and other locations, where they say HIPAA, the health insurance. The Privacy Act for your health information doesn't apply to them. And they removed that in January, but prior to that they said, oh look, we have a HIPAA interface. And you can access our information that way, and it's compliant. Which is it? Can it be both at the same time? We had a fun time. I first gave this talk talking with someone, an administrator from a hospital, who was arguing that even if he had a picture of a patient somewhere on the security camera, he couldn't give that record out. And this is like impossible. If they have accurate health information, they shouldn't be able to do this. But it's very interesting what applies. Just like mandatory arbitration clauses, users may be giving their consent to have their data used in various ways, be in legal text. Also worth noting, like many websites, Higgy's term says their system does not give medical advice, yet they've published studies saying, look, using our gamification system causes people's blood pressure to go down. There's a medical outcome there. Is there a correlation that's potentially medically interesting? Yes, and so how could it not be medical advice if it potentially helps? I'm not sure. In short, let me just quickly finish up, is everyone wants to have their cake and eat it too. Consumers want to have accurate predictions, but they don't want to necessarily know everything about everyone. Businesses want to beat their competitors by having a secret sauce, but they don't want to necessarily tell you that they're going to use the information they use and combine it with like a dozen other providers' information to get all sorts of things you would never think would be possible. Governments want to be able to monitor things, but they don't want to necessarily have communications that they're responsible to protect broken. Kind of see that now with this, this encryption debates. Okay, we want a backdoor, but we want to have a backdoor. We don't want anyone else to have a backdoor. And really that's very difficult, if not possible to do. The acceptable answers to all of this will probably verify country and society. You may have China insist we must have your source code and backdoors. You may have the US or Europe say, no, you can't. And this could make things very difficult for us trying to develop technology. Sure. The catch is that with all of this, you have to hunt down the truth. All too often, researchers find ways to take information claims is not personally identified and use it to identify users. Recent thing I saw this week was someone found a way to identify Tor users by their mouse movements. Worth also noting that mouse movements are commonly used to generate heat maps to figure out where you're interested on a website, which is used to say what parts of my website get used and what parts of the web page are looked at. So we need to look out for misleading arguments, logical fallacies, fake graphs for office, everything the EFF would probably tell you about as well, I admit, but I'm not that crazy. And by the way, this is a very good book. If you haven't read it, it doesn't presume you're a statistics person. This book has been in print. The date examples are a bit dated, but the book is over 60 years old and still in print. So it's also, I believe there's also a copy in archive.org of an older version. I don't know if it's supposed to necessarily be on there, but that's copyright law for you. If you're a user, realize how much information about you is public. Your daily interactions provide more than you realize. Look at your Google history. You haven't yet, and if you're using their services. If you or someone else puts information on the internet, it may never go away. If you want to try add blocking software, do, but realize some websites block you nowadays, and these can occasionally break websites if you track too much. If you want to dox someone, consider if you really want to do it. You will affect feelings, as I mentioned. There may be legal implications. Really, the only reason I can think you should do this is if you're researching your family history. There was a case when I first gave this talk, I believe around November, of someone posted on social media the dog's mouth and was wrapped in duct tape, and the mob kind of just hunted that person down. But there was also a case around the time of the Boston Marathon where the internet went hunting for the Boston Marathon suspect and found the wrong person. And really made havoc of his life. If you're trying to authenticate users, there's a careful balance, making your system easy to secure. Many identifiers are public information or can be derived. Don't try to special case things based on local form. I'd say two-factor, probably everyone's going to have to do two-factor, or at least secondary reset will have to be via second mechanisms. And if you're in analytics, respect your users. Don't try functionality into fragile ways. As I said, the bank site broke because I blocked the tracker. Use tools to measure your impact on performance. It's a whole interesting, ironic reason Ghostery exists is it's an ad company that wants to know how many trackers are being loaded in various websites, and we'll provide that information to you. Don't just do things at home. And if you collect it, someone will steal it. And as someone mentioned this morning, if you're not compromised, you will be. And that's it. And slides are on SlideShare.